The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports for the marketing agency I'd built from scratch. The subject line made my stomach drop. Urgent family matter. Please call immediately. It was from my mother, Linda. Chen, and the timestamp showed she'd sent it at 3 a.m. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, already knowing that whatever was inside would shatter the carefully constructed peace I'd built around my relationship with my family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jessica, we need to talk. Something terrible has happened with the house. Please call as soon as you get this. We're desperate. That was it. No explanation, no context, just raw panic bleeding through the screen. I stared at those words for a long moment, my coffee growing cold as memories I'd spent years burying began to surface. 5 years ago, my parents had made a choice that changed everything between us. They'd taken my college fund, every penny I'd saved working nights at a diner while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, every dollar they'd promised to match for my education, and handed it over to my younger sister Amanda for what they called the wedding of her dreams. I still remembered the exact moment they told me. I was sitting in our cramped living room in suburban Phoenix. Acceptance letters spread across the coffee table like golden tickets to my future. Stanford, Northwestern, University of Chicago, all waiting for my decision. All requiring tuition money that I thought was safely tucked away in the account my parents had helped me establish when I turned 16. Honey, we need to discuss something important, my father, Robert Chen, had said, settling into his worn recliner with the kind of careful deliberation that meant bad news was coming. My mother perched on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands in a gesture I'd learned to associate with family disasters. Amanda was there too, practically glowing in her engagement bliss, her 3-carat diamond catching the afternoon light streaming through our living room windows. She'd gotten engaged to Marcus Thompson 6 months earlier, a junior partner at his family's law firm who came from the kind of old-money Phoenix society that my immigrant parents had always viewed with equal parts admiration and intimidation. Amanda and Marcus have set a date, my mother began, her voice taking on that artificially bright tone she used when delivering unwelcome news. June 15th, right after your graduation. It's going to be beautiful. Everything Amanda has ever dreamed of. I smiled politely, wondering why my sister's wedding planning required a family meeting. Amanda had been talking nonstop about venues and flowers and dress fittings for months. I'd assumed they had the financial aspects handled, especially since Marcus came from money and Amanda worked as a dental hygienist, making decent wages. The Phoenician resort has a cancellation, Amanda burst out, unable to contain her excitement any longer. Can you believe it? The actual Phoenician. They had a cancellation for June, and it's perfect, Jessica. The ballroom, the gardens, everything. It's like it was meant to be. I knew the Phoenician resort. Everyone in Phoenix knew it. It was the kind of place where celebrities got married, where business moguls held their charity galas, where a single wedding could cost more than most. People made in a year. That's wonderful, Amanda, I said carefully, a cold weight beginning to settle in my stomach. I'm sure it will be gorgeous. My father cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the suddenly tense room. The thing is, sweetheart, it's quite expensive. More than we originally budgeted for Amanda's wedding. How much more? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Well, with the venue, catering, flowers, music, photography. My mother's voice trailed off as she began mentally calculating. About $60,000 total. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. $60,000. More than my father made in an entire year managing the electronics section at Best Buy. More than our house was worth when they'd bought it 15 years ago. That's a lot, I said slowly. Are Marcus's parents contributing? Amanda's face flushed slightly. His family has certain expectations about maintaining. their social standing. This wedding isn't just about us, Jessica. It's about positioning Marcus properly in the community for his career. Something in her tone made my chest tighten. The careful way she wasn't meeting my eyes, the way my parents seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for my reaction to something they hadn't yet said. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, though the pieces were already beginning to form a picture I desperately didn't want to see. My father leaned forward, his expression a mixture of determination and guilt. "Amanda is our daughter too, Jessica. We've always tried to be fair to both of you girls. You got to focus on academics. You got into these prestigious schools. You have all these opportunities ahead of you." "Opportunities that require tuition money," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Community college is a perfectly respectable option," my mother said quickly. "You could get your general education requirements done locally, then transfer somewhere excellent for your final 2 years. Lots of successful people start at community college." The words hit me like a physical blow. Community college. After 4 years of sacrificing every weekend, every social event, every teenage milestone to maintain perfect grades and build the kind of college application that would open doors they'd never had access to. "You want to use my college fund?" "For Amanda's wedding," I said flatly, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "We want to support both our daughters in the ways that matter most to their futures," my father corrected, though his voice lacked conviction. "Amanda's marriage to Marcus opens doors for our entire family, Jessica. The connections, the social standing, the business opportunities. This wedding is an investment in all of our futures." I looked at Amanda, waiting for her to say something, to protest, to refuse to let our parents sacrifice my education for her party. Instead, she reached across the coffee table and squeezed my hand with an expression of sympathy that felt more insulting than any outright dismissal would have been. "I know it's disappointing, Jess, but you're so smart and capable. You'll find a way to make college work." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I need this wedding to work out with Marcus's family. His mother already thinks I'm not good enough for him because of our background. If we can't pull off a wedding that meets their standards." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Her relationship, her future, her happiness hung in the balance. And somehow, that had become more important than my education, my future, my dreams. "How much?" I asked quietly. "How much what?" My mother responded, though she knew exactly what I was asking. "How much of my college fund are you planning to take?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, my father spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of it. All of it." $22,000 I'd saved over 4 years, working every weekend and holiday while my classmates went to parties and football games. Money my parents had promised to match, bringing my total college fund to nearly $45,000. Enough for a solid start at any of the schools that had accepted me. Enough to graduate with manageable debt. Enough to begin my adult life with the kind of foundation my parents had never had. "We'll pay you back," my mother added hastily, as if that made the betrayal somehow acceptable. "Once Amanda is settled and Marcus is established in the firm, we'll help you with school expenses. This is just temporary, Jessica. Just postponing your plans by a year or two." A year or two, as if education was something that could be put on hold like a magazine subscription. As if the acceptance letters spread across our coffee table wouldn't expire. As if the scholarship opportunities I'd earned wouldn't disappear. As if my entire carefully planned future could just wait while my sister played princess for a day. "What if I say no?" I asked, testing the waters of rebellion. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My parents exchanged a look I recognized from childhood, the wordless communication that preceded serious consequences. "Jessica," my father said slowly, That money is in an account with both our names on it. Legally, we have every right to use it as we see fit. We were hoping you'd understand and support your sister willingly. Legally. The word hit me like a slap. They weren't asking for my permission. They weren't even really asking for my understanding. They were informing me of a decision they'd already made, hoping I'd go along quietly rather than making things difficult for everyone. I looked around the room at the three people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. My parents, who had spent my entire childhood preaching about the importance of education, about working hard for your dreams, about the opportunities America offered to those willing to sacrifice for them. My sister, who had coasted through high school with C averages and no particular ambitions beyond finding a successful husband. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly and heading for the door. "Jessica, wait," my mother called after me. "Let's talk about this. We can figure something out." But I was already out the door, my acceptance letters still spread across the coffee table like broken promises. I walked for hours that day, wandering through the suburban streets of our neighborhood, past the community college campus where my parents apparently expected me to begin my academic career, past the high school where I'd graduated valedictorian just weeks earlier. When I finally returned home, the house was dark except for a light in Amanda's room. I could hear her on the phone, probably with Marcus or one of her bridesmaids, excitedly discussing wedding plans funded by my stolen future. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter from my parents. They'd gone to the bank to transfer the funds. The deed was already done. That was 5 years ago. 5 years since I'd walked out of that house and never looked back. 5 years since I'd spoken to any of them beyond the occasional awkward text message on holidays. 5 years since I'd built my life entirely on my own terms, without their support, without their approval, without their presence. I'd worked 3 jobs to put myself through the local state university, graduating with a degree in marketing and digital communications. I'd started my own agency in a cramped studio apartment, building it client by client until I could afford real office space. Now, at 27, I owned a successful boutique marketing firm with 12 employees and clients across the Southwest. The success felt hollow sometimes, tainted by the knowledge that it had come at the cost of my family relationships. But I'd convinced myself I was better off without people who could so easily sacrifice my future for social appearances. Now, staring at my mother's desperate email, I felt the familiar mix of anger and pain that any contact with my family brought up. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend I'd never seen it. The rational part of my brain reminded me that whatever crisis they were facing was undoubtedly of their own making. But there was another part, a part I tried to ignore, that remembered how my mother used to read to me every night, how my father had taught me to change a tire and balance, a checkbook, how Amanda and I had once been genuinely close before boys and social status had come between us. Against my better judgment, I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been sitting by the phone waiting. "Jessica? Oh, thank God, I was so worried you wouldn't call back." Her voice sounded older somehow, worn down in a way I didn't remember. Despite everything that had happened between us, hearing that exhaustion in her tone stirred something protective in me. "I got your email," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What's going on?" "It's the house," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "We're going to lose the house, Jessica. The bank is foreclosing and we don't know what to do." Foreclosure. The word hit me harder than I'd expected. That house, cramped and modest as it was, had been my childhood home. It was where I'd done my homework at the kitchen table, where I'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where I'd dreamed about my future while staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my bedroom ceiling. "How did this happen?" I asked, though part of me suspected I already knew. "It's complicated," my mother said, her voice breaking. "After Amanda's wedding, there were some unexpected expenses. Marcus's business had some setbacks. Your father's hours got cut at the store. We thought we could manage, but then what? The wedding vendors, she whispered. Some of the checks bounced. The caterer, the florist, the photographer. They're all demanding payment, and there are legal fees and the interest rates on the credit cards. Her voice dissolved into quiet sobs. I closed my eyes, trying to process what she was telling me. They hadn't just spent my college fund on Amanda's wedding. They'd gone into debt for it, borrowed against the house, maxed out credit cards, all to pay for a single day that was supposed to establish Amanda's place in Phoenix society. "How much do you owe?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Total? About $80,000. But the immediate problem is the house payment. We're 3 months behind, and the bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. If we could just catch up on the mortgage payments, we might be able to work out payment plans for the rest." $80,000, nearly twice what they'd stolen from my college fund. The irony was staggering. "Where are Amanda and Marcus in all this?" I asked. "Surely they can help, given that their wedding created this debt." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "Mom?" "Marcus left," she said finally, her voice barely audible. 6 months after the wedding, he said Amanda wasn't fitting in with his social circle the way he'd hoped. The marriage was annulled. Annulled. As if the whole thing had never happened. As if the $60,000 party and all the debt that followed had been for nothing. As if my sacrificed education had purchased exactly nothing for anyone. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it, despite everything. Whatever Amanda's faults, she didn't deserve to be abandoned by someone who'd claimed to love her. "She's devastated," my mother continued. "She moved back home after the annulment, but she can barely function. She lost her job because she kept missing work, crying all the time. Your father and I are supporting her completely now, which makes everything even tighter financially." So, not only had they destroyed my future for Amanda's wedding, but they were now supporting my sister while facing foreclosure because that wedding had been built on borrowed money and false promises. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said, though I suspected I already knew. "We need help, Jessica. You've done so well for yourself, built that successful business. We know we don't deserve to ask, after what happened with your college fund, but we're desperate. If we lose the house, we'll have nowhere to go." There it was. After 5 years of silence, after taking my future and giving it to Amanda, after choosing her dreams over mine, they wanted me to rescue them from the consequences of their choices. "How much would it take to save the house?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "The back payments would be about $12,000, my mother said quickly, hope creeping into her voice. "If we could just get current on the mortgage, we could probably work out payment plans for the credit cards and the wedding vendors." $12,000, less than what I kept in my emergency fund, less than what I spent on marketing for my business in a good quarter. Money I could write a check for without seriously impacting my finances. But paying their debt wouldn't just be about money. It would be about forgiveness, about resuming relationships that had caused me so much pain, about enabling the same kind of favoritism and poor decision-making that had created this crisis in the first place. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Jessica, we don't have much time," my mother pressed. "The foreclosure hearing is next week. If we can't bring the payments current by then—" "I said I need to think about it," I repeated, more firmly this time. "This isn't a decision I can make in a phone call, Mom. You're asking me to bail you out of a mess that was created by stealing my education fund. Surely you can understand why I might need some time to process that." "Of course," she said quickly, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "Of course you need time. It's just, we're so scared, Jessica. We've never been in a situation like this before." After we hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the Phoenix skyline, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions there Crisis had stirred up. Anger at their presumption in calling me for help after years of silence. Hurt at the casual way they'd dismissed my dreams 5 years ago. Guilt at having the resources to help them while they faced losing their home. But there was something else too. Something that surprised me with its intensity. Relief. Not at their misfortune, but at finally having the upper hand in our relationship dynamic. For the first time in my life, they needed something from me, more than I needed anything from them. My assistant, Maria, knocked on my office door and peered in with concern. "Everything okay, Jess? You've been staring out that window for an hour." Maria was one of my first hires, a recent graduate from Arizona State who'd started as an intern and worked her way up to being my right hand. She knew better than anyone how hard I'd worked to build this business, how many late nights and weekend sacrifices it had taken to get where I was. "Family drama," I said with a rueful smile. "The kind that makes you grateful for chosen family over biological family." She grimaced sympathetically. "Want to talk about it? Sometimes an outside perspective helps." I found myself telling her the whole story, from the stolen college fund to this morning's desperate phone call. Maria listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me work through the complicated emotions that came with being needed by people who'd hurt you. "So what are you going to do?" she asked when I'd finished. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to help them, despite everything. They're still my family, and losing their home would be devastating. But another part of me thinks they made their choices and should live with the consequences. They chose Amanda's social aspirations over my education. They chose to go into debt for a wedding that lasted 1 day over financial stability. Why should I rescue them from decisions they made without considering how those decisions would affect me?" Maria nodded thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something that might sound harsh?" "Go ahead." "If you pay off their debt and save their house, what's to stop them from making the same kinds of choices again? What happens the next time Amanda needs something expensive, or they decide they want to renovate the kitchen or whatever? Are you going to be their bailout fund forever?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding thinking about directly. Enabling their poor financial decisions once might not teach them anything, except that I was available to clean up their messes. "On the other hand," Maria continued, "you're successful enough that $12,000 won't break you. And if helping them helps you heal the relationship with your family, maybe it's worth it for your own peace of mind." "Assuming the relationship can be healed," I said. 5 years is a long time to go without speaking. People change, grudges calcify. Maybe too much damage has been done. "Only one way to find out," Maria pointed out. That evening, I drove through my old neighborhood for the first time in years. The streets looked smaller than I remembered, the houses more weathered. The community college campus where my parents had expected me to start my education sat just a few blocks from the family home, a constant reminder of the dreams they'd casually redirected. I didn't stop at the house, just drove slowly past it, noting the overgrown lawn and the faded paint on the trim. A small "for sale" sign sat in the front yard, but someone had spray-painted "foreclosure" across it in angry red letters. The sight of it hit me harder than I'd expected. This was where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd hosted sleepovers with friends, where I'd spent countless hours studying for the exams that would eventually earn me those college acceptance letters. Whatever complicated emotions I had about my family, this place held 22 years of memories that couldn't be erased by their poor choices. My phone rang as I sat in the car, staring at the house where I'd grown up. Amanda's name appeared on the screen, the first time she'd called me since the wedding that had destroyed our relationship. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Jessica?" Her voice sounded small and uncertain, nothing like the confident bride who'd dismissed my concerns 5 years ago. "Hi, Amanda. Mom told me she called you, about the house." "She did." "I know you probably hate me," Amanda said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I know you have every right to hate me. The wedding, your college fund, everything that happened. I was so selfish, Jess. I was so focused on trying to fit into Marcus's world that I didn't think about what it was costing you." It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged that my sacrifice had been real, that my dreams had mattered too. The words I'd waited 5 years to hear. "I was hurt," I said carefully. "I felt like my future didn't matter to anyone." "It did matter," Amanda said urgently. "It does matter. What you've accomplished since then, building your own business, becoming successful on your own terms. I'm so proud of you, Jessica, and I'm so ashamed of my part in making it harder than it needed to be." The apology felt genuine in a way that surprised me. There was none of the defensiveness or justification I'd expected, just raw regret and acknowledgement of harm caused. "What happened with Marcus?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would be painful for her. "He never loved me," she said simply. "He loved the idea of marrying someone grateful enough to never challenge him, someone who would just smile and look pretty at his business functions. When I started having opinions about how we spent money, or where we lived, or how we spent our time, he decided I wasn't the decorative wife he'd thought he was getting. I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Whatever my anger at Amanda, watching someone you love realize they've been valued only for their compliance had to be devastating. "The worst part is that I knew," she continued. "Deep down, I knew he didn't really see me as an equal partner. But I thought the wedding would change things, that if I could just prove I belonged in his world, he'd start treating me like I mattered." "So you needed the perfect wedding to convince him you were worth loving?" "Exactly. And I needed it so badly that I convinced myself it was okay to take your college money. I told myself you were smart enough to find another way, that you didn't need the money as much as I needed that wedding." Her voice broke. "I was so wrong, Jess, about everything." We sat in silence for a moment, 5 years of hurt and anger hanging between us like a bridge we weren't sure we could cross. "Are you going to help us?" Amanda asked finally. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "This isn't just about money, Amanda. It's about trust and family dynamics, and whether any of us have really changed enough to have a healthy relationship." "I understand," she said quietly. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm sorry. For the college fund, for dismissing your dreams, for not standing up for you when I should have. You deserved so much better from all of us." After we hung up, I continued sitting in my car outside our childhood home, trying to reconcile the Amanda I'd just spoken with the selfish young woman who'd watched our parents steal my future without protest. People could change, I knew that intellectually. But trusting that change, believing it was permanent rather than just a response to crisis, was another matter entirely. My phone buzzed with a text message from my father, the first direct communication we'd had in 3 years. "Jessica, I know we have no right to ask for your help after what we did with your college money. If you decide you can't help us, I'll understand. But I wanted you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret that decision. You worked so hard for that money, and we had no right to take it from you. I'm proud of what you've accomplished despite our failures as parents. Love, Dad." The message was so unlike my father's usual communication style that I had to read it twice. Robert Chen was a man of few words, someone who expressed love through actions rather than declarations. For him to admit fault so directly, to acknowledge that they'd failed as parents, represented a level of vulnerability I'd never seen from him. I started the car and drove home to my downtown loft, my mind churning with possibilities and complications. $12,000 to save their house. A relatively small amount of money that could either rebuild my relationship with my family or enable them to continue making destructive choices. But as I thought about it more, I realized the decision wasn't really about the money at all. It was about whether I was ready to forgive them, whether I believed they'd genuinely learned from their mistakes, and whether I wanted to be the kind of person who could help family members in crisis regardless of past hurts. The successful business I'd built, the comfortable life I'd created, the financial security I enjoyed, all of it had come from channeling my anger and disappointment into productive action. In a strange way, my parents' betrayal had motivated me to achieve more than I might have otherwise. I'd succeeded not just despite their choices, but partly because of them. That night, I called my accountant and asked about the tax implications of giving family members large sums of money. I researched foreclosure laws in Arizona, trying to understand exactly what my parents were facing and whether there might be alternatives to my intervention. I also did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old college acceptance letters, the ones I'd kept in a box despite the pain they represented. Stanford, Northwestern, University of Chicago, all still there, all still representing the path my life might have taken if my parents had kept their promises. But as I looked at those letters, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't sure I would change anything, even if I could go back and do it differently. The struggle of putting myself through school, the necessity of building my business. From nothing, the independence that came from knowing I could survive anything life threw at me. All of that had shaped me into someone I genuinely liked. Would I have been happier following the traditional path, attending an elite university, on my parents' dime, maybe working for someone else's company instead of building my own? It was impossible to know, but I didn't think so. The next morning, I made my decision. I would help them, but not unconditionally. If they wanted my financial assistance, they would have to accept my terms for how the family dynamic would work going forward. I called my mother and asked her to arrange a family meeting for that evening. All of them together, ready to have the kind of honest conversation we should have had 5 years ago. "Of course," she said eagerly. "Oh, Jessica, thank you. I know this can't be easy for you, but thank you for even considering helping us." "Don't thank me yet, Mom," I said. "We need to talk about a lot more than just money. If we're going to rebuild this family, we're going to do it right this time." As I prepared for that evening's meeting, I thought about the young woman I'd been 5 years ago, devastated by her family's betrayal, but determined to prove she could succeed without them. She'd had no idea that her lowest moment would eventually become the foundation for her greatest achievements. Now, with the power to rescue or abandon them, I had the chance to define what kind of person I wanted to be and what kind of family we could become if we were all willing to do the hard work of genuine change. The meeting that would determine our family's future was just hours away. That evening, I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home for the first time in 5 years. The familiar crunch of gravel under my tires brought back a flood of memories, but the house itself looked smaller and shabbier than I remembered. The paint was peeling on the shutters, the front porch sagged slightly, and the garden my mother had once tended with such pride was overgrown with weeds. I sat in my car for a moment, steeling myself for what was about to happen. Through the living room window, I could see the warm glow of lamplight and the silhouettes of my family members moving around inside. It struck me how surreal this moment was, returning to the place where my dreams had been shattered to potentially save the people who had shattered them. My mother opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for my arrival. She looked older than her 58 years, her black hair now streaked with silver and worry lines etched around her eyes. But her smile was the same. Warm one I remembered from childhood, tinged now with nervousness and hope. "Jessica," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "You look wonderful, successful." I glanced down at my tailored blazer and designer jeans, the kind of professional attire that had become second nature to me. In this modest living room where I'd grown up wearing hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, my current appearance felt almost like armor. "Hi, Mom," I said, accepting her tentative hug. She felt frailer than I expected, and I caught a whiff of the jasmine perfume she'd worn for as long as I could remember. My father appeared from the kitchen, moving more slowly than he used to. The past 5 years had aged him considerably, his thick black hair now completely gray, and his shoulders stooped in a way that suggested the weight of financial stress. But his eyes lit up when he saw me, and for a moment, I was transported back to childhood, when coming home to see my father's face had been the best part of any day. "My successful daughter," he said in his accented English, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming." Amanda emerged from what used to be my bedroom, looking nothing like the confident bride I remembered from 5 years ago. She was thinner now, almost gaunt, and her once lustrous hair hung limp around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that shocked me most. They held a hollow quality that spoke of genuine suffering and hard-earned wisdom. "Hi, Jess," she said quietly, not moving closer but not backing away either. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "Neither was I admitted, settling into the same spot on the couch where I'd received the devastating news about my college fund years earlier. The four of us arranged ourselves in the living room with an awkwardness that highlighted just how far we'd drifted apart. My parents took the couch opposite me, while Amanda perched on the edge of an armchair, as if ready to flee at any moment. "So," I said, deciding to dive straight into the difficult conversation, "let's talk about where we are and how we got here." My mother's hands twisted in her lap, a nervous habit I remembered well. "Jessica, we know we have no right to ask for your help after what we did with your college money. But we're desperate, and you're the only one who might be able to save us." "Let's start with the money," I said, pulling out a notebook where I'd written down questions I wanted answered. "Mom said you owe $80,000 total. I need to understand exactly how that happened." My father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "After Amanda's wedding, we thought we could manage the debt. We had taken out a second mortgage on the house for $30,000, put $20,000 on credit cards, and used your college fund for the remaining $10,000. $60,000 total for the wedding," I calculated. "But Mom said you owe $80,000 now?" "Interest," Amanda said quietly, speaking for the first time since the conversation had begun in earnest. "And penalties, and legal fees when some of the vendors sued us for bounced checks." The picture was becoming clearer, and it was even worse than I'd initially understood. They hadn't just spent money they didn't have, they'd spent money they couldn't realistically pay back, all for one day that was supposed to secure Amanda's social position. "Tell me about Marcus," I said, looking directly at my sister. "What exactly happened there?" Amanda's face crumpled slightly, but she forced herself to meet my eyes. "He was never the person I thought he was. The Marcus I dated was charming and attentive and made me feel special. But the Marcus I married was cold and controlling and constantly critical." "When did you realize this?" I pressed, not unkindly but needing to understand the timeline. "Honestly, about 3 weeks after the wedding. We went to a dinner party at his parents' house, and I made some comment about wanting to go back to work after our honeymoon. He laughed and told everyone that I was playing career woman, but would settle down once we started having children." She wiped her eyes. "When I tried to talk to him about it later, he said he'd assumed I understood that his wife wouldn't need to work, that my job was to support his career and maintain our social presence. But you stayed married for 6 months, I pointed out. "I kept thinking things would get better," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd invested so much in that relationship, sacrificed so much. Your college fund, our family's financial stability, my own sense of who I was. I couldn't accept that it had all been for nothing." My mother spoke up, her voice defensive. "We all believed Marcus loved Amanda. He seemed like such a good match, from a good family with connections that could help all of us." "Help all of us how?" I asked, genuinely curious about their reasoning. "His family has businesses all over Phoenix," my father explained. "Robert thought maybe they could throw some marketing work your way. help you grow your company." I stared at him in disbelief. "You thought Marcus's family would hire me for my marketing services? A 22-year-old with no experience or track record?" "We thought," my mother said weakly, "that family connections might open doors. So you sacrificed my immediate future, my education, for the possibility that Amanda's marriage might eventually benefit my career?" The absurdity of it was staggering. "It sounds terrible when you put it like that," my father admitted. "But at the time, it seemed like Amanda's marriage was a sure thing, and your education was something that could be delayed or accomplished differently." "My education wasn't just about getting a degree," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "It was about the connections I would have made, the opportunities that come from attending prestigious schools, the doors that open when you have that kind of credential. You can't just delay that and expect the same results." "We know that now," Amanda said. "We know how badly we miscalculated everything." I leaned back in the couch, trying to process not just their financial crisis, but the depth of their misunderstanding about how success actually works. They'd been so focused on the appearance of success, on social connections and status symbols, that they'd completely missed the substance of what creates lasting achievement. "Let's talk about the house," I said, changing direction. "How far behind are you on payments, and what exactly does the foreclosure timeline look like?" My mother pulled out a thick folder of papers, the kind of documentation that accumulates when you're fighting to keep your home. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage payments. That's about $4,000. But with late fees and legal costs, the total amount we need to bring the loan current is closer to $12,000. And if you can't come up with that money?" "The foreclosure sale is scheduled for next Friday," my father said, 6 days from now. "After that, we have 30 days to vacate the property." 6 days. The urgency of their situation was suddenly very real. Whatever complex emotions I had about their past choices, the immediate crisis was that my parents and sister would be homeless in less than a week. "Where would you go?" I asked. "If you lose the house?" The question hung in the air unanswered, for several long moments. "We don't know," my mother finally admitted. "We've looked into rental apartments, but with our credit ruined and no savings for deposits, no one will rent to us. Amanda lost her job because she was missing too much work after the divorce. Your father's hours at the store have been cut, back to part-time. We might have to move into one of those extended stay motels," Amanda said, her voice hollow. "At least until we can figure something else out." The image of my family living in a motel room hit me harder than I'd expected. Whatever anger I carried about their choices, the idea of my parents sleeping on motel beds and storing their belongings in suitcases was genuinely heartbreaking. "Okay," I said, making a decision I hoped I wouldn't regret. "I can write a check for the $12,000 to bring the mortgage current. But before I do that, we need to establish some ground rules for how this family is going to function going forward." The relief on their faces was immediate and overwhelming. My mother started crying. My father's shoulders sagged as if a tremendous weight had been lifted, and Amanda looked at me with something approaching awe. "Thank you," my mother whispered. "Jessica, thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet," I said firmly, "because my help comes with conditions, and they're not negotiable." I pulled out a sheet of paper where I'd written down my terms during the drive over. "First," I began, "complete financial transparency. I want to see all your bank statements, credit card balances, income documentation, everything. If I'm bailing you out of this crisis, I need to understand your complete financial picture." My father nodded slowly. "That's fair." "Second, you're going to work with a financial counselor that I'll pay for, someone who can help you create a realistic budget and payment plan for the remaining debt. This isn't just about saving the house. It's about making sure you never end up in this situation again." "Of course," my mother agreed quickly. Third, and this is the big one, I continued, my voice taking on a harder edge. No more major financial decisions without consulting me first. No co-signing loans, no large purchases, no financial commitments over $500 without my approval. The room went quiet. I could see them processing the implications of what I was saying. Essentially, I was requiring them to give up their financial independence in exchange for my help. "Jessica," my father said carefully, "we appreciate your help, but we're still adults. We can't agree to let you control all our financial decisions." "Then you can't have my money," I replied matter-of-factly. "Dad, you've proven that you can't be trusted to make sound financial decisions. You spent my entire college fund on a wedding for a marriage that lasted 6 months. You borrowed against your house for that same wedding. You're facing foreclosure because you prioritized one day of social performance over years of financial stability." "We made mistakes," Amanda said, "but giving you complete control over our finances seems extreme." "Is it more extreme than being homeless?" I asked bluntly. "Because that's your alternative. I'm not trying to control you out of spite. I'm trying to make sure that my $12,000 actually solves your problem instead of just delaying it by a few months." I could see them struggling with the reality of their situation. Pride warred with desperation, and desperation was clearly winning. "What exactly would that look like?" my mother asked. "The financial approval process? Major purchases, or financial commitments get discussed with me first? I'm not talking about grocery shopping or gas for the car. I'm talking about things like co-signing loans, making large purchases, taking on new debt, anything that could affect your ability to pay your bills." "For how long?" my father wanted to know. "Until you've paid off the credit card debt and demonstrated that you can live within your means for at least a year," I said. "Probably about 3 years total. 3 years of financial oversight." It was a long time, but given the magnitude of their poor decisions, it seemed reasonable to me. "There's one more condition," I added. "Amanda needs to get a job and contribute to the household expenses. I'm not supporting 3 adults indefinitely." Amanda straightened up, looking more alert than she had since I'd arrived. "I've been trying to find work, but it's hard with my employment gap and the depression after the divorce." "I understand that the divorce was devastating," I said, trying to balance compassion with reality. "But you're 25 years old, and you need to be financially independent. I can help you find a job through my business connections, but you have to actually want to work." "I do want to work," Amanda insisted. "I just haven't known where to start, especially with my confidence so shaken." Looking at my sister, I realized that her suffering over the past year had been genuine. The shallow young woman who'd dismissed my concerns about the college fund had been replaced by someone who'd learned hard lessons about the difference between love and social convenience. "What kind of work are you interested in?" I asked. "I actually enjoyed the dental hygienist work," she said, "but I'd need to get my license reinstated, and I'm not sure I could handle going back to healthcare right now. Maybe something in customer service or retail to start." It was a reasonable answer, showing that she was thinking practically rather than holding out for something prestigious. "I can help you put together a resume and practice interviewing," I offered, "but you have to commit to actually following through on job applications and interviews." "I will," Amanda said, and for the first time since I'd arrived, her voice carried some determination. We spent the next hour going through their financial documents in detail. The picture that emerged was even bleaker than I'd initially understood. Beyond the mortgage and wedding-related debt, they had ongoing expenses they could barely cover even with my father's reduced income. "Your budget is completely unsustainable," I said after reviewing everything. "Even if I pay off the $12,000 to save the house, you're still spending more than you're bringing in every month." "We know," my mother said miserably. "We've been using credit cards just to buy groceries and pay utilities, but we didn't know what else to do." You need to cut expenses dramatically, I said, and increase income. That means Amanda getting a job immediately. And Dad, you need to either get your hours increased at the store or find additional part-time work. I've been trying to get more hours, my father said, but retail is struggling and they're not adding shifts. Then, you need a second job, I said bluntly. I know it's not ideal at your age, but the alternative is losing your home despite my help. We spent another hour creating a realistic budget that would allow them to cover their basic expenses while making minimum payments on their remaining debt. It was tight, requiring significant lifestyle changes, but it was achievable if they were committed to following it. This budget assumes Amanda finds work within the next month, I warned. If that doesn't happen, we'll need to make additional cuts. What kind of cuts? My mother asked nervously. Cable television, dining out, entertainment expenses, anything that's not absolutely essential, I said. This is about survival, not comfort. As the evening wore on, I found myself settling into a role I'd never expected to play in my family. Not the daughter seeking approval or support, but the adult child taking responsibility for her parents' welfare. It was strange and uncomfortable, but also oddly satisfying to finally be in a position where my voice carried real weight in family decisions. There's something else we need to discuss, I said as we prepared to wrap up the financial planning. The family dynamics that led to this crisis. The way Amanda's needs have always taken priority over mine. The way my dreams and goals have been treated as less important than hers. The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not the uncomfortable quiet of people avoiding difficult topics, but the focused attention of people ready to confront hard truths. You're right, my mother said finally. We did prioritize Amanda, and we convinced ourselves it was because she needed more help. But really, we were just taking you for granted because you were so capable and independent. We assumed you'd succeed no matter what, my father added. So when Amanda needed something, it felt okay to redirect resources to her because we figured you'd find another way. But that wasn't fair to you, Amanda said, looking directly at me. You shouldn't have had to be the strong one all the time. You shouldn't have had to sacrifice your dreams because mine seemed more fragile. It was the kind of acknowledgement I'd waited years to hear, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. I need to know that if I help you through this crisis, things will actually be different, I said. I need to know that my financial support won't just enable the same patterns that created this problem in the first place. How can we prove that to you? My mother asked. By treating me as an equal adult family member, not the backup plan when other options fail, I said. By including me in family decisions that affect everyone. By valuing my input even when it's not what you want to hear, by recognizing that my success doesn't obligate me to fix everyone else's problems. We can do that, my father said. We should have been doing that all along. As I prepared to leave that evening, having agreed to wire the money to save their house, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that I could prevent my family from becoming homeless. Anxiety about whether they would actually follow through on their commitments to change. Satisfaction at finally having my perspective acknowledged and my worth recognized. But there was something else too, something I hadn't expected. For the first time in 5 years, I felt genuinely connected to my family again. Not because they'd finally given me what I'd always wanted, but because we'd had an honest conversation about our relationship dynamics and established new terms for moving forward. Jessica, Amanda said as I reached the door, I know saying sorry doesn't undo the damage we caused, but I want you to know that I see now how wrong we were. About the college fund, about your dreams, about everything. Apologies are a starting point, I said. But what matters now is whether you actually follow through on the changes we've discussed. We will, my mother promised. You'll see. This crisis taught us what really matters, and what really matters is family. As I drove home through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood, I reflected on how much had changed in a single evening. I'd gone from being the excluded daughter to being the family's financial lifeline and decision-maker. It was a position I'd never sought, but one that gave me the power to reshape our relationships on my own terms. The next morning, I wired the $12,000 to bring their mortgage current. I also set up the appointment with a financial counselor and began reaching out to contacts who might have job opportunities for Amanda. But as I went through the motions of rescuing my family from their crisis, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much longer and more complicated journey. Money could solve their immediate problem, but rebuilding trust and establishing healthy family dynamics would take years of consistent effort from all of us. 3 days later, Amanda called with news that would test our new family dynamics sooner than I'd expected. "Jess, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice nervous. "Marcus contacted me. He wants to meet to talk about getting back together." My first instinct was to tell her exactly what I thought of that idea, but I caught myself. This was exactly the kind of situation where the old family patterns could reassert themselves, where Amanda's romantic drama could overshadow practical concerns and sound decision-making. "What do you think about that?" I asked instead, genuinely curious about her perspective. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me misses him, misses the life we had planned together, but another part of me knows that he left because I wasn't the person he wanted me to be." "Which part do you think is right?" "Probably the second part," she said quietly. "But Jess, what if this is my only chance at the kind of life I always imagined? What if I never meet anyone else who can offer me that kind of security and social position?" There it was, the same thinking that had led to the wedding debt crisis in the first place. The belief that external validation and social status were more important than genuine compatibility and mutual respect. "Amanda," I said carefully, "do you remember what you told me about why Marcus left? About how he wanted a decorative wife who would never challenge him?" "Yes, but maybe I could be that person if it meant saving the marriage. Maybe I was too demanding, too focused on my own needs." "Listen to yourself," I said, unable to keep the concern out of my voice. "You're talking about erasing your own personality to please someone who's already proven he doesn't value you as an individual. But the alternative is being alone and working at some entry-level job while living with my parents," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "At least with Marcus, I'd have financial security and social status. And you'd also have a husband who sees you as an accessory rather than a partner," I pointed out. "Is that really the life you want?" The conversation continued for another 20 minutes with Amanda wavering between recognizing the unhealthiness of her relationship with Marcus and longing for the security his wealth represented. I found myself in the unfamiliar position of being the voice of reason, encouraging my sister to prioritize her own self-worth over external validation. By the time we hung up, Amanda had agreed to think carefully before responding to Marcus, but I could tell she was still tempted by his offer. It was a stark reminder that changing ingrained patterns of thinking takes time, and that my family's tendency to prioritize appearances over substance wouldn't disappear overnight. That evening, I called my parents to discuss Amanda's situation and gauge their perspective on her potential reconciliation with Marcus. "If Marcus is willing to take her back," my mother said, "maybe Amanda should consider it. Marriage is about compromise, and if she could just be a little more flexible about his expectations." "Mom," I interrupted, "are you seriously suggesting that Amanda should change her fundamental personality to please a man who abandoned her when she didn't meet his standards?" "I'm suggesting that good marriages require sacrifice from both partners," she said defensively. "And Marcus comes from a good family with financial stability. Financial stability that comes at the cost of Amanda's autonomy and self-respect," I countered. "Is that really what you want for your daughter?" My father joined the conversation, his voice thoughtful. "Jessica has a point, Linda. We've seen how unhappy Amanda was during the marriage. Maybe financial security isn't worth sacrificing her happiness. It was encouraging to hear my father supporting my perspective, but concerning that my mother was still prioritizing status and security over Amanda's well-being. The old patterns of thinking that had created their crisis were clearly still present, ready to resurface when faced with new challenges. Over the following week, I found myself deeply involved in my family's daily decisions in ways I'd never imagined. Amanda asked for my input on job applications. My parents consulted me about their budget choices, and all of them seemed to genuinely value my perspective in ways they never had before. But I also noticed subtle signs that the fundamental changes we'd discussed might be more fragile than I'd hoped. My mother still made comments about Amanda's potential for marrying well in the future. My father still seemed to view my business success as somehow less legitimate than traditional employment. And Amanda still struggled with the idea that her worth wasn't determined by her ability to attract wealthy men. The real test came 10 days after I'd saved their house, when Amanda finally decided to meet with Marcus to hear what he had to say about reconciliation. She called me immediately afterward, her voice shaky with emotion. "He offered me everything I thought I wanted," she said. "A bigger house, a substantial allowance, all the social connections I'd ever dreamed of. All I had to do was agree to, be the kind of wife he needed for his career advancement." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I needed time to think about it," she said. "But Jess, I'm scared. What if this is my only chance at financial security? What if I'm making a huge mistake by not taking him back?" "Amanda," I said, "do you love him? Not the lifestyle he can provide? Not the status that comes with being his wife, but him as a person?" The long pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "I don't think I ever really loved him," she admitted finally. "I loved what he represented, what he could give me. But the actual person? The way he talked to me? The way he made me feel small and grateful for his attention? No, I don't think that was love." "Then you have your answer," I said gently. "But the practical considerations will work themselves out if you focus on building a life based on your own values and capabilities rather than trying to attach yourself to someone else's success," I finished. That night, Amanda texted Marcus to decline his offer of reconciliation. It was a small decision in some ways, but it represented a fundamental shift in how she thought about her own worth and future possibilities. 3 weeks after saving their house, I received an update that showed me both how much my family had changed and how much work still lay ahead of us. Amanda had gotten a job at a local marketing firm, starting in an entry-level position that paid modestly but offered growth opportunities. My father had found part-time work at a small electronics repair shop, using skills he'd developed over years in retail. And my mother had started a small business selling homemade foods at farmers markets, something she'd always talked about but never had the courage to pursue. They were all working, all contributing to their financial recovery, and all beginning to rebuild their sense of self-worth through their own efforts rather than through external validation. But they were also struggling with the reality of their reduced circumstances, the loss of the lifestyle they'd briefly enjoyed during Amanda's marriage, and the daily discipline required to stick to their strict budget. "Some days I wonder if we made the right choice," my mother confided during one of our weekly check-in calls. "The house feels so empty now, and money is so tight. Sometimes I think we were happier when we were spending freely, even if it wasn't sustainable." "Were you really happier?" I asked. "Or were you just avoiding dealing with your problems?" "Maybe both," she admitted. "It's hard to know the difference sometimes." These conversations reminded me that changing a family's fundamental dynamics is a long-term process, requiring constant reinforcement and adjustment. The crisis that had brought us back together had created an opportunity for growth, but seizing that opportunity required ongoing commitment from everyone involved. As I reflected on the month that had passed since my parents' desperate call for help, I realized that saving their house had been the easy part. The real challenge was building a family relationship based on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared responsibility rather than the old patterns of favoritism, financial irresponsibility, and emotional manipulation. But for the first time in years, it felt like a challenge worth undertaking. My family had finally acknowledged the damage their choices had caused, taken responsibility for changing their behavior, and demonstrated genuine appreciation for my perspective and contributions. Whether this transformation would prove lasting remained to be seen, but I was cautiously optimistic that we were building something stronger and more authentic than what we'd had before. And regardless of what happened with them, I'd learned something valuable about my own capacity for forgiveness, leadership, and setting healthy boundaries with people I loved. The journey from exclusion to inclusion, from resentment to reconciliation, had been more complex than I'd ever imagined. But it had also been more rewarding than I dared to hope. 6 months after I'd saved my family's house, I stood in the conference room of my marketing agency, presenting a proposal to Phoenix's largest nonprofit foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was pitching a campaign about family financial literacy, drawing from experiences I'd gained through my own family's crisis. The research shows that financial education programs work best when they address not just budgeting and debt management, but the emotional and cultural factors that drive spending decisions, I explained to the board of directors. Families often make financially destructive choices because they're prioritizing social acceptance or trying to solve emotional problems through material purchases. The presentation went flawlessly, and as I fielded questions from the board members, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with landing a lucrative contract. This work felt meaningful in a way that most marketing campaigns didn't, because it was rooted in genuine understanding of how financial stress destroys families and how proper education can prevent that destruction. After securing the foundation, as a client, I drove to my parents' house for our weekly family dinner, a tradition we'd established as part of rebuilding our relationships. The house looked dramatically different than it had 6 months earlier. The yard was meticulously maintained, the exterior had been painted, and small improvements throughout showed the pride that comes with earning rather than borrowing your way to stability. Inside, the changes were even more striking. Gone were the expensive decorative items my mother had purchased during Amanda's wedding planning period, replaced by family photos and handmade crafts that spoke to genuine rather than aspirational values. The atmosphere felt warmer and more authentic than it had in years. "How did the foundation presentation go?" my father asked, as I settled into the kitchen chair that had become my regular spot during these dinners. "Very well," I said, accepting a cup of tea from my mother. "They approved the full campaign budget, which means steady work for the next 18 months. "You should be proud," Amanda said, looking up from the laptop where she'd been working on correspondence for her own recent promotion. "Building your business to the point where you're landing clients like that is really impressive." Amanda's transformation over the past months had been remarkable to witness. The entry-level marketing position she'd taken had quickly led to increased responsibilities as her supervisors recognized her attention to detail and communication skills. More importantly, she'd developed a confidence that came from earning her own way, rather than depending on others for validation. "Speaking of work," my mother said, settling plates of her homemade dumplings on the table, "I have news about the farmers market business." My mother's small food venture had grown steadily over the months, starting with weekend sales at local markets and expanding to include catering for small events. What had begun as a way to contribute to the household income had evolved into something approaching a real business. "3 restaurants want to carry my spring rolls as regular menu items," she announced with obvious pride. "I'll need to get commercial kitchen space and licensing, but the potential income is significant." "That's wonderful, Mom," I said, genuinely excited for her success. Do you need help with the business planning or licensing requirements?" "Actually, yes," she said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I know I'm supposed to consult you about major financial decisions, but I wasn't sure if starting a real business counted as something I needed approval for." This was exactly the kind of situation that tested whether our new family dynamic was actually working. 6 months ago, my mother would have either made the decision unilaterally or avoided making it entirely out of fear of my reaction. Now she was seeking guidance proactively, treating me as a trusted advisor rather than an authority figure to be appeased or circumvented. "It's definitely something we should plan carefully," I said. "But Mom, this is your business idea and your hard work paying off. I'm not here to control your decisions, just to help you make them wisely." We spent the next hour discussing the practical aspects of scaling her food business, from commercial kitchen rental costs to liability insurance requirements. It was the kind of collaborative, problem-solving conversation I'd always hoped to have with my family, where everyone's expertise and perspective were valued equally. "I have some news, too," Amanda said when we'd finished discussing Mom's business plans. "I've been offered a position with a marketing agency in Denver. It's a significant promotion with a substantial salary increase." The announcement caught me off guard. Amanda had been doing well at her current job and seemed to be rebuilding her life successfully in Phoenix. The idea of her moving away just as our family relationships were healing felt unsettling. "Tell us about the opportunity," my father said, though I could see concern in his expression as well. "It's a senior coordinator position with a company that specializes in healthcare marketing," Amanda explained. "The salary is almost double what I'm making now, and Denver's a great city for young professionals. The cost of living is higher, but not enough to offset the income increase." "It sounds like an excellent opportunity," I said, trying to keep my personal feelings separate from what was obviously a good career move for her. "I think so too," Amanda said. "But I wanted to discuss it with all of you before making a decision. This family has been through enough upheaval, and I don't want to create more stress by moving away right when things are stabilizing." Her consideration for the family's needs alongside her own career goals represented a level of maturity and selflessness that would have been unimaginable in the sister who'd watched our parents steal my college fund without protest. The growth she'd achieved through facing the consequences of her choices was evident in every aspect of how she approached decisions now. "Amanda," I said carefully, "you can't base major life decisions on our emotional needs. If this position is good for your career and your future, you should take it." "But what about helping with the household expenses?" she asked. "You made financial stability one of the conditions for helping us, and my income is part of that stability." It was a fair concern, and one that highlighted how interconnected our family's financial recovery had become. Amanda's contribution to household expenses had been crucial in making their budget work, and losing that income would require significant adjustments. "We'll figure out the money," my father said firmly. "Amanda, you've sacrificed enough of your potential for this family's financial problems. If this job is right for you, we'll find a way to make our budget work without your income." "Are you sure?" Amanda asked, looking around the table at each of us. "I don't want to leave you." Struggling again. "We're not the same people who got into financial trouble over a wedding," my mother said. "We've learned to live within our means, and we've all developed income sources that don't depend on debt or unsustainable spending. We'll miss you terribly, but we'll be fine financially." The conversation continued through dinner and into the evening, covering everything from Amanda's timeline for making a decision to logistics for maintaining family connections across the distance. What struck me most was how naturally we'd all fallen into treating this as a family decision that required input from everyone, rather than something Amanda would figure out on her own or something my parents would try to influence through emotional manipulation. 2 weeks later, Amanda accepted the Denver position, with a start date that would give her time to train her replacement and help our parents adjust their budget to account for the lost income. Her departure was emotional for all of us, but it also felt like a celebration of how much she'd grown and how much our family had healed. The day before Amanda left for Denver, she asked if we could take a walk together, just the two of us. We ended up at the community college campus, where our parents had once expected me to begin my education, sitting on a bench overlooking the courtyard where students hurried between classes. "I keep thinking about that day," Amanda said without preamble. "When Mom and Dad told you about using your college fund for my wedding. I can see now how devastating that must have been, but at the time, I was so focused on my own panic about fitting in with Marcus's family that I couldn't see past my own needs." "You were young," I said, "and scared. People make selfish decisions when they're scared." "That's generous of you to say, but it doesn't excuse what I did," Amanda replied. "I watched our parents take your dreams away, and I let it happen because it solved my problems." I've been thinking about that a lot, about how I would feel if someone did that to me now. "And how would you feel?" "Betrayed," she said immediately. "Completely betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect and support me. I don't know how you forgave us, Jess. I'm not sure I could have been that gracious if our positions were reversed." I considered her words carefully before responding. "Honestly, I'm not sure I fully forgave you until I saw how much you'd changed. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a process that unfolds as people demonstrate that they've learned from their mistakes." "Do you think I've learned?" she asked. "Do you think I'm a different person than I was 5 years ago?" "Completely different," I said without hesitation. The Amanda who let our parents use my college fund was someone who thought external. Validation was more important than family loyalty. The Amanda who's moving to Denver for a career opportunity she earned through her own hard work is someone who understands that self-respect comes from your own achievements, not from other people's opinions. "I hope you're right," she said. "I hope I never hurt people I love again the way I hurt you." "We all hurt people we love sometimes," I said. "The question is whether we learn from it and do better next time." As Amanda prepared to leave Phoenix, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically my relationship with my family had changed since that desperate phone call 6 months earlier. The people who had once treated my dreams as expendable now consulted me on major decisions and genuinely valued my perspective. The sister who had once dismissed my concerns now called me regularly for advice and support. The parents who had once prioritized appearances over substance now lived according to principles of financial responsibility and emotional honesty. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I saw myself in relation to my family. Instead of the perpetually disappointed daughter seeking approval that never came, I'd become someone whose opinions were sought and whose success was celebrated. Instead of the family outsider whose needs came last, I'd become the anchor point around which important decisions revolved. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. There were times when my parents reverted to old patterns of thinking, when Amanda second-guessed decisions that required her to prioritize her own needs, when I had to resist the urge to control rather than guide their choices. Building healthy family relationships after years of dysfunction was an ongoing process that required constant attention and adjustment. But 6 months after saving their house, I could see that the changes we'd made were becoming permanent parts of how we related to each other. My parents had learned to live within their means not because I was monitoring their spending, but because they'd experienced the peace of mind that comes with financial stability. Amanda had learned to value her own capabilities not because I'd lectured her about self-worth, but because she'd discovered the satisfaction of earning success through her own efforts. 3 months after Amanda moved to Denver, I received a call that would test our family's new dynamics in an unexpected way. My father had been offered a management position at a new electronics store, a job that would nearly double his income, but require him to relocate to Tucson. "It's an incredible opportunity," he explained during our conversation. The company is expanding rapidly, and they want experienced managers to oversee new locations. The salary would be enough for your mother and me to finally pay off all our remaining debt and start saving for retirement. That sounds wonderful, Dad, I said. Are you worried about something? Well, he said hesitantly, it would mean selling the house you saved for us. And it would mean your mother having to give up the food business she's worked so hard to build. We're not sure it's fair to make such a big change when you've invested so much in helping us stabilize our life here. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful consideration I'd hoped my parents would develop, weighing the impact of their decisions on family members who had supported them. But it was also an indication that they still didn't fully understand that my help had been about empowering them to make good choices, not about creating obligations that would limit their future options. Dad, I said, the whole point of helping you through the financial crisis was to get you to a place where you could make decisions based on what's best for your future, not based on fear or debt or other people's expectations. If this job is good for you and Mom, you should take it. But what about all the work we've done to rebuild our relationship? What about our family dinners and staying connected? Family connections don't depend on geographic proximity, I assured him. We can maintain our relationships regardless of where you live. In fact, taking a job that improves your financial security might be the best thing you could do for our family relationships because it removes the financial stress that caused so many of our problems in the first place. My parents did take the Tucson job, selling their house for enough money to pay off their remaining debt and leaving Phoenix with genuine financial stability for the first time in years. My mother was able to restart her food business in Tucson, finding new markets and customers who appreciated her cooking. The distance made our family gatherings less frequent but more intentional, and the absence of financial stress made all our interactions more relaxed and genuine. A year after my parents' desperate call for help, I found myself in a position I'd never expected to occupy. Instead of being the family member whose needs came last, I'd become someone whose success had created opportunities for everyone. Amanda's career was thriving in Denver. My parents were financially stable and pursuing work they enjoyed in Tucson, and I'd built my business to the point where I could afford to be generous with my time and resources without compromising my own security. But the most valuable outcome of our family's crisis hadn't been the financial recovery or the improved relationships, though both of those mattered enormously. The most valuable outcome had been learning that forgiveness and transformation were possible even after profound betrayal, that people could change their fundamental behaviors when they were forced to confront the consequences of their choices, and that families could rebuild themselves on healthier foundations when everyone was willing to do the hard work of honest communication and mutual respect. The college fund that had been stolen from me 5 years earlier had ultimately led to something more valuable than any education could have provided. It had led to the knowledge that I was capable of succeeding entirely on my own terms, that I could set boundaries that protected my own interests while still maintaining meaningful relationships with people I loved, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to prove they can change. Standing in my office a full year after that first desperate phone call, looking out at the Phoenix skyline where I'd built a successful business and a satisfying life, realized that my family's betrayal had ultimately been the catalyst for becoming the person I'd always been meant to be. Not the obedient daughter seeking approval, but the confident woman who knew her own worth and insisted that others recognize it too. Not the victim of other people's poor choices, but the architect of solutions that benefited everyone involved. My parents had emptied my college fund for my sister's wedding, creating a crisis that had torn our family apart. But in the end, their decision had led to all of us becoming better, stronger, more authentic versions of ourselves. The money they'd stolen had been replaced by something far more valuable: the understanding that true family bonds are built on mutual respect and shared responsibility, not on sacrifice and obligation. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, my phone buzzed with a group text from Amanda. She'd just been promoted again, this time to a director-level position that would allow her to start her own team. My parents had responded with heart emojis and congratulations, and I added my own message of pride and support. Looking at our family text chain, full of genuine celebration for each other's achievements, and free of the undertones of competition and resentment that had once characterized our communications, I felt deeply grateful for the journey that had brought us to this point. The path from betrayal to forgiveness to transformation had been longer and more difficult than any of us had expected, but it had ultimately led to relationships that were stronger and more authentic than anything we'd had before. The college fund was long gone, spent on a wedding that had lasted 6 months and debt that had taken years to repay. But the family I'd gained through the process of saving and rebuilding after that crisis was worth more than any education money could have bought. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.